The steam rising from the open hood looked almost alive, curling into the cold morning air like a warning that something else in life was breaking again. And in that moment, standing in a cracked motel parking lot off a forgotten highway in Missouri, you might have wondered what you would do if every plan you trusted suddenly stalled right in front of you. The car had given up the same way her luck always seemed to, loudly and without apology. And Hannah stood there with her hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn navy coat she had bought second-hand years ago, her shoulders tight, her heart even tighter. She hated how small she felt next to the smoking engine, hated how the peeling paint on the motel doors behind her seemed to echo her own exhaustion. If this were you, stranded with no savings, no backup plan, and no one expecting you home, would you feel the same quiet panic she did, the kind that didn't scream but sat heavy in your chest and asked what you had done wrong to deserve so many restarts? She had come to this place chasing the idea of stability, leaving behind a small town in Indiana, and a childhood shaped by church pews, borrowed clothes, and prayers whispered more out of habit than hope. Her mother used to say that faith didn't mean life would be easy, only that it would be worth it. But standing there at 28, with student debt, a part-time job at a diner, and an interview she was now surely going to miss, Hannah wasn't sure what worth was supposed to look like anymore. The coat she wore had frayed cuffs and a missing button, and she suddenly felt exposed, as if the world could see every moment she'd come up short. That was when she noticed him, a few steps away, not rushing, not staring, just present in a way that felt unfamiliar. His name was Michael, a name so ordinary it almost blended into the background. Yet the calm way he leaned against his truck suggested a man who had learned patience the hard way. He had the look of someone who had also lost things, the kind of loss that settles into your eyes and softens your judgments. He worked maintenance for the motel, fixing broken locks and leaking pipes, and had seen enough travelers pass through to recognize that look on Hannah's face, the one that said this breakdown was about more than a car. As he offered help in a quiet, respectful way, Hannah felt the reflexive urge to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for not having it together. She mentioned, almost without realizing it, that she didn't have anything nice to wear if she made it to her interview anyway, that the job probably wanted someone polished and confident, someone who didn't smell like radiator steam and old anxiety. The words came out tangled with embarrassment, and she braced herself for the familiar, polite distance people put up when they didn't know how to respond to poverty without feeling uncomfortable. But Michael didn't flinch. He listened, really listened, the way people do when they're not trying to fix you, only understand you. There was no pity in his expression, no advice wrapped in superiority. Instead, there was something steadier, something that made Hannah feel, for the first time in weeks, that she wasn't being measured and found lacking. If you were standing there, feeling judged by your own reflection, wouldn't you ache for that same simple kindness, the kind that doesn't ask you to prove your worth? He helped her get the car running enough to move it, explaining gently that it wouldn't make it far, but far enough. In the process, he shared pieces of his own story without drama, how he had once chased a high-paying job in Chicago only to lose himself in the pressure, how he'd come back to Missouri with less money but more peace. He spoke about Sundays spent in a small brick church a few miles away, about how faith had slowly taught him that value wasn't something you earned with appearances or titles. Hannah hadn't heard someone talk about belief like that in a long time, not as a rule book, but as a quiet anchor. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed again and again, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes because Hannah found excuses to stop by the motel after shifts at the diner. The interview she'd nearly missed turned into a rejection email, brief and impersonal, and she cried alone in her car afterward, the disappointment mixing with an old, familiar shame. Michael didn't try to make it better when she told him. He just sat with her in the silence, letting her feel the weight without rushing her through it, and that somehow made it lighter. Gradually, something in Hannah began to change, not in the dramatic way movies like to show, but subtly, the way dawn creeps in without asking permission. She started to notice how Michael treated everyone the same, from the well-dressed guests to the ones counting out coins for the vending machine. She noticed how he fixed things carefully, as if every repair mattered, and how he spoke about people as if they were stories still being written, not conclusions already drawn. Being around him made her question the harsh narrative she'd been telling herself for years. There were still hard days. Bills didn't disappear, and neither did the ache of wanting more than she could afford. She still wore the same clothes, still worried about how she looked walking into rooms where everyone else seemed ahead. But now, when that familiar voice in her head told her she wasn't enough, Another voice quietly answered back, reminding her of a man who had seen her at her most flustered and hadn't turned away. If this were your life, would that small shift in perspective be enough to keep you going, just a little longer? One evening, after a church potluck where Hannah had almost decided not to go because she didn't own anything appropriate, Michael walked with her through the parking lot as the sun dipped low, the sky painted in soft, forgiving colors. She admitted how tired she was of measuring herself against standards she never seemed to meet, how exhausting it was to feel invisible and judged at the same time. She expected encouragement, maybe even reassurance about the future, but what she received was simpler and deeper. He reminded her without grand speeches that dignity wasn't sewn into fabric, that grace didn't check labels before it showed up. That truth settled into Hannah slowly, reshaping her choices. She applied for another job, then another, each rejection stinging less than the last because she no longer saw them as verdicts on her worth. She saved what she could, fixed her car properly, and even started helping at the diner in ways that made the work feel meaningful. Through it all, Michael remained a steady presence, not a savior, not a solution, but a companion who believed in her before she fully believed in herself. Months later, standing in that same parking lot where her car had once failed her, Hannah realized she no longer felt that old panic. Life was still uncertain, still imperfect, but it no longer felt hostile. She understood now that love and respect didn't arrive when you finally looked the part. They arrived when someone chose to see you as you were and stay anyway. That understanding changed the way she moved through the world, with more gentleness toward herself and others. Before the story ends, take a moment and tell us in the comments if you've ever felt judged for what you didn't have, or if someone's quiet kindness changed the way you saw yourself. If this story reached something tender inside you, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, so more hearts searching for hope can find stories like this when they need them most.